YouTube? We're finally doing this video. We're talking about power inverters. Yeah! What's going on, YouTube? We're finally here talking about power inverters. I used to get a lot of questions on how it was possible for me to hook up the PlayStation, the TV, the surround sound, and all the other little knickknacks I had in my other trucks without having a big, huge power inverter hooked up. Well, there's ways of doing it, and I'm here to teach you. But let's start with the basics first, okay? What we have here are your truck stop specials, okay? 300 watt inverter, 750 watt inverter, okay? Now, both of them are hooked up with the little standard cigarette 12 volt plug, what do you call it there? The 12 volt cigarette lighter plugs, okay? Now, the 750 watt inverter, well, it's really not supposed to be hooked up with that, but I'll get into that in a minute on how we did it and why we did it, okay? They're both hooked up with 12 volt cigarette lighter plugs, okay? Screwed into the back, okay? Very simple stuff. This one is designed to be hooked up to the battery with thicker cables. Like I said, we're gonna get into that in a minute. Don't get ahead. Anyway, these are what they call modified sine wave inverters. There's another type of inverter out there called pure sine wave inverter. Well, what's the difference? Well, let's just use layman's terms because I don't have an oscilloscope or any of that fancy doodads to show you the actual difference. I'm just going to tell you in layman's terms. These modified sine wave inverters convert your DC to AC, okay? That's direct current to alternating current, okay? That's your battery, 12 volt battery, to 120 volt electric home plug, if you will, okay? So we're going from DC to AC, okay? The problem with going from DC to AC, when we do this power inverter, when we convert the power, okay, it's the alternator and the battery, they don't put out good clean power, so to speak. It's always, you know, the voltage is always up and down depending on how fast the alternator's spinning, depending on how fast the motor's spinning, along with depending on how much voltage the batteries are holding at that precise moment. And also depending on how much draw we're drawing out of the batteries with lights and stereo, all that good stuff. So the power is always fluctuating, okay? And that's and it creates a modified sine wave, is what it's called. It's basically dirty power, okay? These are dirty power inverters, okay? When you get a pure sine wave inverter, that will take that dirty power and clean it up and make it smooth, clean, accurate, consistent power, okay? Well, why would we need one or the other? Well, for instance, certain appliances, certain items like laptops, battery chargers, PlayStations, stuff like that will not work all the time on a modified sine wave inverter. Okay, try not to get too technical here because I don't want to overload your brains. Okay, but in a nutshell, for the high-tech electronics like your PlayStations, your TVs, your laptop chargers, all those battery chargers shit, you're gonna need a pure sine wave inverter. They cost a little bit more money, but it's clean power, and you won't. I'm pretty sure you're not gonna find them at any truck stop. You're gonna have to order them online or go to like a Harbor Freight or something like that maybe to find one. But they're a lot more expensive. only because they give you that good, clean, smooth, consistent power that these don't, okay? But I have had the PlayStation hooked up to these things, and it does work most of the time. There were times where I'd plug my laptop into this one and it wouldn't work, and I'd plug it into this one and it would, and then sometimes it would be the other way around, okay? So, if you're going to be running high tech electronics, like laptops, computers, gaming systems, get yourself a good pure sine wave inverter if you can. If you can get away with it with one of these, then by all means, save your money. But if sometimes you have to, depending on the item. Now that we got pure sine wave and modified sine wave out of the way, let's talk about power and the differences on what we can do. Most of the trucks have multiple cigarette lighter 12-volt plugs, okay? Okay. So, plug one in here. Now we got 300 watts. Plug one in here. Now we got 750 watts. Do we? No. It's not how it works. You're only going to be able to get out what comes out of here. So whatever amount of power is being fed out of that plug is what's going to be able to get out of this. Now let me explain this to you. Just because I got a 750 watt or 300 watt doesn't mean I'm going to get 750 out of this thing, okay? The reason being is because of what you're plugging it into. These circuits here are 10 amp circuits. There's a 10 amp fuse on these circuits, okay? And for instance, this power inverter is 300 watts and it has a 40 amp fuse in the back of it. So if you have a 10 amp fuse on this circuit and a 40 amp fuse on this circuit, which one's gonna blow first? The 10 amp, okay? Well, Matt, I got my PlayStation hooked up to it, I got the microwave hooked up to it, the TV hooked, well, you get too much wattage. You have to know what your appliances and stuff is putting out, okay? The PlayStation on full tilt, the PlayStation 3 up there, is putting out like 280, 290 when it's booting up and all that good stuff. So I would have to run the PlayStation off of this thing here because it can handle it, and I would have to run. In most trucks, there's only one 20 amp fuse circuit, and usually it's under the bunk. In a Cascadia, it's under the bunk. There's two plugs underneath the bunk in the Cascadia, and one of them's a 20 amp circuit, which means it can handle a lot more power, okay? What I mean by all this is that if you have, let's say, the PlayStation hooked up to the 300 watt inverter, and the fuse keeps blowing in the inverter, let's say, right? Well, you stepped it up to 40 amps, let's say, because this came with 40 amps, but let's say I was blowing the fuse, and I had a 20 amp fuse in here, and I was blowing it with the PlayStation, okay? I'd put a 40 amp in here. Now, do you think that you're not going to blow this? You're going to blow this too. This is going to be the next thing that blows. It's usually the first thing that goes, okay? Because a lot of times this wire gets real hot sometimes, and there's also a fuse in here too. There's fuses in here. A little spring loaded. Oh shit, don't do what I just did and lose the damn spring. Anyway, there's a fuse in here too, okay? So, depending on what you're putting in this thing and what you're feeding it will determine on what will blow first. But don't be like, oh well, if I got 40 amps here, it's working, let me match it up and put a 40 amp fuse in this circuit. No, don't do that. Don't do that, because you'll melt the wires. Those wires in the circuit were not made to handle that amperage, okay? That's how you get fires going, okay? You don't want to catch fire. Or you don't want to start a fire. Don't catch fire, what an idiot. You don't want to start a fire, okay? So don't start stepping up your fuses thinking that's going to solve the problem. It's not. You're going to get a fire. Okay? So you need to know your appliances. You need to know what what you got going and what your circuits can handle. Most TVs, laptops, stuff like that, you'll be able to run off of a 300 watt inverter. I had the laptop, the TV, and the surround sound system all hooked up to one inverter in one circuit. Okay, the PlayStation was on the other circuit, and then on the other side of the truck I had another one hooked up, so I'd have, so that way I wasn't running plugs everywhere. You know what I'm saying? So what I recommend you do is you get a bunch of these little 300 watt ones. They're not that expensive, and you plug them into all the different circuits where you need electric, and you tuck it away nice and neat, and 9 out of 10 times most of the things will work. Now, I gotta find that fucking spring. Hold on. Found it. Put this thing back together while I'm talking. So anyway, so you got a fuse in here, you got a fuse in there, you got a fuse in the circuit. You got to make sure you know what you're plugging in to what and how, so that way you don't blow shit up or ruin your stuff, or catch something on fire. It's very important. Know what your stuff puts out. For instance, this coffee pot right here. This coffee pot, when it's brewing the coffee, is putting out about 900 watts of power, which means you will not be able to run it off of this. You will not be able to run it off of this. You will need to step your game up and get yourself a big one. This is a 2,000 watt inverter, modified sine wave, not clean power, but the microwave, toaster ovens, coffee pots, TVs, all that good stuff will run off of this bad boy here. But you can't hook, you can, don't get me wrong, you can hook up these little wires right here and hook it up to this positive and negative. You can, but you can't go running anything more than about 300 watts on a 10 amp fuse. It will not work. Like, for instance, this thing here has a whole bunch of fuses inside here. I can't remember how many, but there's a mathematical formula that goes along with watts times amps and all that shit. I can't remember it, but look it up. I'll try to find it and put it in the description box below. What else? So when you get the big one, you got to make sure you hook it up properly. And if you're at one of those companies that won't allow it, then you're kind of shit out of luck. But if you're at a company that does allow it, have the shop install it for you. Make sure they're using 2 gauge, 0 gauge if they have it. Nothing more than 4 gauge, because the wire gets too thin, the wire gets hot, and you catch fire. Okay. So like I said, for the guys that are at these smaller companies that don't allow power inverters to be hooked up to the battery, buy yourself a whole bunch of these little ones and use all the different cigarette lighter plugs throughout your truck, and you'll have power. Most of them have 2 plugs, and they have USB to charge your phone and stuff like that, or you can go out and buy one of these things here, a power strip, and hook it up to there. But like I said, make sure you don't run too many things at once, because when you start blowing fuses, you'll see. I learned by trial and error. I learned by doing it, blowing fuses left and right, figuring out what circuits can handle what. That's how you gotta learn too sometimes. But yeah, you just, like I said, the trick is know what your device is putting out in wattage. If your device says it's putting out, like for instance the PlayStation, during boot up, okay, it puts out like 290 watts up to like 320, I think. But when it's running at idle, it's only putting out like, I think, 100 watts at the most. The thing is, it's like a fan. It's like a motor, okay? During startup, getting the blade spinning, the fan moving, it's using a lot of amperage. But once the fan gets to running speed, the amperage will come down because it doesn't need that much more force. It just needs a little bit of force to keep it spinning. Same concept with all the other electronics. The microwave and all that stuff. Like, for instance, if you're going to get a big inverter, or your company is installing big inverters, okay, like Night Transportation is finally installing them, and the trick is, know your wattage on your items, okay? Microwaves, little ones, usually put out about 750, okay, on full tilt. The toaster oven up there will put out about 1200 watts. The skillet will put out about 12 to 1400 watts. The coffee pot's 900 watts. Those are the heavy-duty, high wattage items that you need to have hooked up to you need to have the power inverter hooked up to the battery properly and safely, and your engine has to be running in order to use those items properly. You can't go run a microwave with the engine off. I mean, you can, don't get me wrong. First of all, it'll take forever to heat up whatever you're heating up, and you'll kill your batteries like that. 700-800 watts with no engine running, you're draining that battery so fast, and it's not good. So if you're with a company that has inverters, make sure you're idling your truck while you're using the heavy-duty items. Toaster ovens, blenders, all that good stuff. Your TV, PlayStation, you don't need to be idling in order to use those. But you get a good 3-4 hours without idling with the PlayStation and the TV, and then the battery will go dead enough to where it starts killing breakers in your truck and it gets real dark. And then you gotta start the truck up anyway to charge the batteries back up. So, one more thing, like I was just saying, when the batteries drop down below 12.4 in most trucks, 12.4 volts, the circuit breaker will pop, and it will start shutting off the rear of the truck. The lights, the refrigerator, the cigarette lighter plugs will start turning off, and that's done to conserve the power that's left in the battery so that the battery doesn't go completely dead, so that way you can start the truck in the morning. Once you guys get into your trucks, I would make sure you test it. Test that theory. Start your truck up, get it running, make sure the voltage is correct, okay? And then shut the truck off. Turn all the lights on of the truck. Turn the headlights on. Turn the radio on. Turn everything on, and watch your voltage start to drop. And then you should start seeing the breakers popping once the voltage goes low. And that way, you're also learning your truck now. You're learning what your truck can do too. You're learning its capabilities. So that way, when you start hooking things up in your truck, you'll know exactly what it can and can't handle. Okay? I encourage you to become one with your truck, especially when you're hooking up expensive electronics and stuff, okay? I know it sounds kind of weird, but you gotta know what your truck can handle and what it can't handle. I've had a lot of trucks in my 4.5 years of driving, and each one of them was different, okay? So, learn your trucks. I hope I gave you guys some insight on how to use these things properly and the difference between a modified sine wave and a pure sine wave. Like I said, a lot of it's trial and error. You gotta hook it up and see if it'll handle it. Hook it up and see if it'll work. There were times where, in some trucks that I had, where the PlayStation wouldn't even fire up. But in other trucks, it would fire up just fine with the same inverter. You know, it was weird, you know. Like I said, trial and error, guys. But be safe while you're doing it. Make sure you know what your wattages are. And make sure when you're plugging them into these 12-volt plugs here, nothing more than 300 watts. Nothing more than 10 to 20 amps at the most. Okay? You don't want to fry a circuit and then catch the damn dashboard on fire or whatever. So, I want to give a big shout out to my friend Tomas Ramirez. I was supposed to meet up with him tonight, but he had some duties that he had to take care of, which is understandable. But this video is for him. We're out of here. Hope you guys learned something today.